War has always produced its share of the unexplained. Men who march into the theater of battle carry weapons, orders, and maps. They are trained to identify the enemy, to read terrain, to survive. But there are things that no training can prepare a soldier for. Things that no field manual contains. Things that have no name. The Vietnam War, one of the longest, bloodiest, and most psychologically devastating conflicts in American military history, was fought across some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. Mountains swallowed in monsoon fog, valleys carpeted in triple-canopied jungles so thick that sunlight never reached the ground, rivers that carried disease as readily as they carried current. American soldiers fighting in that jungle knew the sound of an ambush. They knew the whisper of a tripwire. They knew the smell of death carried on humid air. But they were not prepared for what was watching them from the trees. Hundreds of U.S. servicemen came home from Vietnam carrying not only the scars of battle, but the memory of something else, something they struggled to explain, something that walked upright, showed no fear of armed men, and stared back at them from the shadows of the most dangerous jungle on Earth. This is not a story of ghosts. It is not a story of hallucinations. It is a story drawn from documented soldier accounts, military records, scientific expeditions, and the folklore of a land that has kept its secrets for centuries. This is the story of the rock apes of Vietnam. To understand what the soldiers encountered, one must first understand where they were, and what kind of war they were fighting. The Vietnam War, known in Vietnam as the American War, escalated dramatically through the 1960s. By the mid-decade, hundreds of thousands of young American servicemen had been deployed to the Republic of South Vietnam to assist in resisting the communist North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong guerrilla forces fighting in the South. The geography of the conflict was unlike anything the American military had encountered before. Much of the fighting took place in the Central Highlands, a vast mountainous region in the interior of South Vietnam, covering provinces such as Quang Nam, Dua Tien, and Quang Tri. The terrain was defined by rugged mountain ridgelines rising thousands of feet above sea level, blanketed in jungle so dense and so ancient that entire valleys had likely never been mapped. The I Corps Tactical Zone, in the northernmost reaches of South Vietnam, was the operational stomping ground of the United States Marine Corps. It was a region of critical strategic importance, home to some of the war's most brutal engagements, and also, as it would turn out, home to something that no military intelligence briefing had anticipated. In this region, roughly 12 statute miles west-northwest of the Nong Air Base, rises a mountain known as Dong Denver. Its peak sits at 868 meters, 2,847 feet, above sea level, overlooking Elephant Valley to the north and the coastline to the east. Early in 1966, U.S. Navy Seabees blew the flat top of Dong Den Mountain to create a divisional outpost, landing zone, and radio relay site for the 3rd Marines. It was a commanding position, strategically vital, and it was already occupied, not by the Viet Cong, not by the North Vietnamese Army, by something else entirely. Before the war ever brought American soldiers to these mountains, the local Vietnamese people already had a name for what lived in the deep jungle. They called them the Nguoi Rung, the people of the forest. In other regions, they were known as the Bachitut. These were not creatures of recent invention. They appear in Vietnamese folklore stretching back generations, described with remarkable consistency across villages that had no contact with one another. The Nguoi Rung were said to be bipedal, walking upright on 2 legs like a man. They were covered in hair, dark brown or black across most of the body, with hairless knees, hands, and face. They were powerfully built, stoutly muscular with protruding stomachs and long, heavy arms. They had prominent brow ridges above deep-set, dark eyes and wide, heavy jaws. They were reported to be active primarily at dusk and through the night. They traveled in groups, and they were not afraid of human beings. The locals of these remote mountain regions considered them simply a fact of life, cautionary, to be avoided, but real. A creature of the old forest, a remnant of something ancient. When American soldiers arrived and began carving outposts into the mountain ridgelines, they were entering territory these creatures had inhabited undisturbed for an unknown length of time. The first wave of sightings came almost immediately after American forces established a presence in the Central Highlands. Marines manning remote hilltop positions began reporting encounters in 1965 and 1966. Initially, these reports were dismissed. Soldiers under extreme stress, in an alien environment, fighting a guerrilla enemy they could rarely see. It was easy to explain away a strange sighting as imagination fatigue or the jungle playing tricks. But the sightings continued, and they were too specific, too consistent, too numerous to ignore. One of the earliest documented accounts comes from a reconnaissance unit operating near Hill 868 in Quang Nam Province in early 1966. The soldiers were positioned along the tree line when they heard movement in the foliage ahead. Heavy, deliberate movement. The instinct of every trained infantryman in that jungle was the same. Enemy combatants. But what stepped out from the brush was no enemy soldier. An oblong head framed the hair-covered face. Dark, deep-set eyes lay beneath the prominent brow, and they did nothing to complement the heavy jowls and angry mouth. That description, recorded by a GI whose account was later preserved in author Craig P.J. Jorgensen's compiled Wartime testimony, Very Crazy GI, Strange but True Stories of the Vietnam War, captures a paralysis that these encounters consistently produced. These were men trained to make split-second decisions. And yet, when they looked at what stood before them, they froze. It was not a man. It was not anything they had been briefed about. It was something between the world they knew and the world they did not. It was early 1966. A unit of Alpha Company, 3rd Marines, was manning the divisional outpost on top of Dong Den Mountain. The post offered commanding views in every direction, but at night, the jungle below it became an impenetrable darkness. Sound traveled strangely up there, amplified by the surrounding valley, distorted by wind and rain. The Marines on the hilltop noticed movement in the foliage surrounding the base of their position. Dense, widespread, the kind of movement that made trained men reach for their weapons and radio their commanding officer. They called their captain. They reported possible movement. A large formation of enemy soldiers, perhaps Viet Cong, circling the outpost. The captain's response was measured. Stay in place. Do not fire. Do not reveal your position. Minutes passed. The Marines watched the tree line. The movement did not stop. It increased. They could hear breathing now. Something large. Something close. And then, over the radio, came the update that nobody expected. Never mind. We have a large number of apes all around us. The captain reiterated his order. Stay in position. Do not discharge your weapons. But the situation was already beyond that. The creatures, dozens of them, possibly hundreds, the Marines would later estimate, had descended upon a hilltop outpost in a mass that the men could barely comprehend. They were everywhere, in the trees, on the rocks, moving along the cleared edge of the post. And they were throwing things. Rocks. The creatures were throwing rocks. Hard, fast, and accurately. The Marines, following their captain's orders, had attempted to discourage the animals by throwing rocks back. It was, as subsequent accounts would make clear, a catastrophically poor strategy. The radio transmission that followed was later described by veterans as one of the most surreal communications of the entire war. They're throwing rocks back at us, and they throw harder than we do. Request permission to fire. A loud impact, possibly a substantial rock striking the radio man, was heard over the channel, followed by a scream, then a cascade of curses, growls, and sounds that officers listening from the command post could not fully categorize. The captain's response: No shooting. Do not give away your position. The transmission that followed was brief. We're fixing bayonets. The captain, unable to raise his men on the radio, dispatched a squad to reconnoiter the situation on the hill. What they found became one of the most extraordinary and disputed accounts of the entire Vietnam War. Marines and creatures strewn across Hill 868. Injuries on both sides. 4 Marines were so severely wounded that they required medical evacuation by helicopter. The accounts that followed, relayed by surviving Marines, spoke of the bodies of several of the creatures lying across the hilltop alongside the injured men. No photographs were taken. No bodies were recovered for examination. The incident was logged under the umbrella term the veterans came to use for all such encounters. Rock Apes. The Battle of Dong Den, as it became known in the oral history of the 3rd Marines, entered the unofficial record of the war. It was never formally classified. It was never officially explained. The Battle of Dong Den was not an isolated incident. It was, in retrospect, simply the most dramatic chapter in a story that was playing out across the entire I Corps region and beyond throughout the war. In 1968, Mike Company of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, was operating in the mountains near Monkey Mountain on the Sun Tra Peninsula just outside of Da Nang. The Marines reported a pattern that was becoming recognizable. The creatures would position themselves above a patrol on elevated terrain, and then rain rocks down upon them, ambushing the ambush teams, in the soldiers' own words. Not a random act of animal aggression, something more deliberate, strategic, almost. The Sun Tra Peninsula and the hill that American troops had taken to calling Monkey Mountain became notorious. Sightings that were so numerous, so consistent, that the nickname stuck, not among cryptozoologists or UFO enthusiasts, but among the Marines themselves, men who had seen the creatures and who passed the warnings on to every new rotation of soldiers arriving in the area. In 1969, Delta Company, 1st of the 502nd Infantry, 101st Airborne Division, was taking a break on Nguoi Rung Ridge, approximately 10 miles south of Hue City. It was midday. The men were eating lunch on a narrow trail cut into the ridgeline. Then, from around a bend in the trail, approximately 10 meters ahead, something appeared. Not one creature. 8. They came walking up the trail in a loose group, moving with the unhurried confidence of animals that had never been taught to fear anything. In the green filtered light of the jungle, with their dark, upright forms and the slight formality of their movement, several soldiers initially reached for their weapons, certain they were NBA soldiers in khaki. The alpha male, described as nearly black in color, noticeably larger and darker than the others, who ranged from light to medium brown, peeled away from the group and positioned himself in the trees above the trail. What followed was a behavior that primatologists would later recognize as a classic protective maneuver. The alpha charged toward the GIs, then retreated, again and again, covering the withdrawal of his group, drawing attention and potential fire toward himself while the others retreated. The soldiers fired into the air to drive the creatures back. The firing worked. Eventually, the creatures retreated into the jungle. The men stood in the sudden silence of the trail, weapons still in hand, staring at the empty bend in the path. The shooting all stopped at the same instant, and we just stood there in shock for a while. That account, recorded in veteran testimonials, captures a particular quality of every encounter with the rock apes. The violence of the response was never in proportion to any actual threat. It was a shock of recognition, of seeing something that occupied a space between the known and the unknown, that unmanned these soldiers more than any enemy rifle had. Gary Linderer, a long-range reconnaissance patrol veteran with the 101st Airborne Division, described an encounter in which he pushed through dense undergrowth and came face-to-face with a creature he had never seen before. He had seen rock apes in the field. He knew what they looked like. This was different. Deep-set eyes on a prominent brow, 5 feet tall with long muscular arms. It walked upright with broad shoulders and a heavy torso. When he told his patrol mates what he had seen, their dismissal was immediate. Rock ape. You just saw a rock ape. Linderer shook his head. He knew rock apes. He had seen them before. This was in the wrong part of the jungle for a rock ape. And rock apes weren't that big. What were the rock apes? The question drew serious attention, not only from American soldiers, but from scientists, military commanders, and the Vietnamese government itself. The first instinct of biologists was to reach for a familiar explanation. The creatures must be a known species, misidentified under extreme conditions. The most obvious candidate was the orangutan, a large, reddish-brown ape that once inhabited much of Southeast Asia. The size matched, roughly. The hair color described by some witnesses matched. But there was a fundamental problem with this theory. Orangutans have been extinct in Vietnam for thousands of years. There is no viable orangutan population anywhere near the region where sightings were occurring. Additionally, orangutan behavior is deeply solitary. The creatures the soldiers described traveled in large, organized groups, a social structure that bears no resemblance to orangutan habits. The next candidate was the northern white-cheeked gibbon, which is native to Vietnam and does live in social groups. However, gibbons are small animals. A male white-cheeked gibbon weighs approximately 20 pounds. The creatures soldiers were encountering were described as standing 5 to 6 feet tall and powerfully built. Animals that could wrestle Marines to the ground and absorb rifle fire without stopping. No gibbon on Earth matches that description. In 1970, Professor Tran Hong Viet of Hanoi's Pedagogic University discovered a set of footprints in the Vietnamese jungle that he could not explain. They were bipedal. They were larger than human footprint, but too large to belong to any known ape. He made plaster casts and submitted them for analysis. The findings produced no definitive identification. For years later, in 1974, General Hong Min of the Vietnam People's Army, the same North Vietnamese military whose soldiers had also been reporting sightings of the rock apes throughout the war, organized a formal expedition into the jungle with the express purpose of capturing or killing one of these creatures and bringing back evidence of its existence. The expedition returned empty-handed. Professor Vo Quy of Vietnam National University led a second scientific expedition. His team found prints, described as wider than human print, but too large to belong to any catalog ape. But no animal, no body, no photograph, nothing that could resolve the question. Some researchers pointed to the Gigantopithecus, an extinct genus of giant ape that once inhabited Southeast Asia, standing potentially up to 10 feet tall. Most paleontologists believe Gigantopithecus went extinct hundreds of thousands of years ago. But the fossil record is incomplete, and the jungle canopy of the Central Highlands of Vietnam had barely been explored by Western science, even by the 1960s. The psychological explanation was also put forward. Young men, in the most stressful conditions imaginable, operating in an alien environment under constant threat of death. The human mind under such pressure is capable of manufacturing extraordinary perceptions. The widespread use of marijuana among U.S. troops in Vietnam was cited as a possible contributing factor, though marijuana is not a hallucinogenic substance. But this explanation falters when held against the evidence. These were not single, isolated accounts from soldiers on the edge of breakdown. They were consistent, detailed, numerous accounts from men across multiple units, multiple years, and both sides of the conflict. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army soldiers reported the same creatures in the same locations. The physical descriptions converged independently on the same features. And no known hallucinogenic compound was being widely distributed to both American and North Vietnamese troops simultaneously. The most measured scientific assessment came from Dr. John McKinnon, a British zoologist and naturalist who discovered new mammal species in Vietnam during and after the war. In 1969, McKinnon found what locals identified as Bipedal footprints in the jungles of Borneo. He did not dismiss the possibility. He wrote carefully and professionally that the existence of a previously unknown ape species in the remote jungles of Southeast Asia could not be ruled out. That careful, professional non-denial was, in its way, more unsettling than any dramatic claim. There is one account from the Vietnam War that does not appear in any formal military report, was never submitted to any scientific body, and yet has been repeated by the man who witnessed it in every interview he has given since returning home. The soldier, a veteran of the 101st Airborne Division, his account preserved in Jorgensen's compilation, was on a 6-man patrol somewhere in the mountainous terrain south of Hughes City. It was 1969. The war was in its most brutal phase. This man had been in country long enough to know the sounds of the jungle at every hour of the day and night. He knew which silence was safe and which silence was not. They were resting in a small depression near the tree line when the vegetation above them, the slope rising 15 yards uphill from their position, began to shake. Not wind, not rain, something deliberate. Every man in the patrol froze. Every weapon came up. Eyes scanned the tree line. Fingers curled around triggers. And then, from the brush, a head emerged. A long cucumber-shaped head showed up. The face was covered in red hair, with a pair of dark eyes and huge mouth. The creature then stepped out of the vegetation into a clearing, allowing us to observe the rest of its body. Muscular, covered in the same type of reddish hair. It wasn't taller than 5 feet. It walked upright. It stopped and it looked at us. The soldier remembered clearly what was said among the men in those next few seconds. One man whispered, "What the hell is that?" Another answered, "Rock ape." A third replied immediately, "No, it ain't. I've seen rock apes. That sure as hell isn't a rock ape." The first man looked at the creature, then back at his patrol. "It's an orangutan, isn't it?" The third man shook his head. "Well, if it is, then it can't read a map. There are no orangutans in Vietnam." The creature stood in the small clearing for several seconds. It did not flee. It did not display aggression. It simply looked at them, examined them. The soldier said, as though it were conducting its own assessment of what it had found. The way a man might look at something new, something unfamiliar, something that required consideration before a decision was made. And then it turned and walked back into the jungle, not running, not startled, walking, with purpose. The patrol remained in position for a long time afterward. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved to investigate. There was a shared, unspoken understanding among the 6 men on that ridgeline that what they had seen had been watching them long before they saw it, that it had known exactly where they were, that it had chosen to reveal itself, and that its reasons for doing so were entirely its own. The Vietnam War ended in 1975. American forces withdrew. The jungle, as it always does, reclaimed what had been taken from it. The hilltops were abandoned. The outposts collapsed under years of rain and root and vine. Dong Den Mountain, Hill 868, returned to what had been before the Seabees flattened its summit. A mountain, a wilderness, a place where human law did not reach. To this day, the dense jungles of the Central Highlands remain largely inaccessible to outsiders. The land is seeded with millions of unexploded ordnance, landmines, artillery shells, cluster munitions, left behind by decades of war. The locals know this. They do not walk those mountain trails. Scientists who might wish to explore the deep jungle face a practical obstacle that no research grant can overcome. And in that inaccessibility, something persists. The North Vietnamese Communist Party Secretariat, even after the war, ordered an investigation into the rock ape phenomenon. Multiple scientific expeditions were organized. All of them found footprints they could not identify. None of them found what they were looking for. The question that those expeditions were trying to answer, the question that Gary Linderer and the 6 men on the ridgeline and the Marines of Dong Den and the hundreds of other soldiers who reported these encounters were asking, has never been resolved. What is notable about the rock ape accounts? What separates them from the usual taxonomy of wartime rumor and battlefield legend is their documentary weight. These stories do not live in cryptozoology journals or paranormal newsletters. They live in books about the Vietnam War, books written by veterans about combat, about sacrifice, about the reality of what they experienced in that jungle. The rock apes appear as a matter of course, the same way an author might mention the heat or the rain or the sound of incoming fire, not as the point of the story, as part of the landscape. That is perhaps the most compelling thing about them. The men who saw them were not looking for monsters. They were trying to survive, and what they encountered was not born from any desire for drama or attention. It was simply there, in the jungle, watching. There's a concept in zoology called a relict population, a group of animals that have survived, isolated, in a habitat long after the rest of its species has disappeared from the world. The deep jungles of Southeast Asia have produced genuine zoological surprises within living memory. In 1992, scientists discovered the saola, a large bovine mammal, in the forests of Vietnam and Laos, an entire species, previously unknown to science, living less than 100 miles from where American soldiers have been fighting for a decade. The world's forest still holds secrets. Perhaps the Nguoi Rung is one of them. Perhaps it is a remnant population of an ancient primate that survived in the last inaccessible folds of the Central Highlands. Perhaps it is a species that science has not yet cataloged and may never catalog because the land it inhabits is too dangerous to explore. Or perhaps, as the skeptics maintain, it is a story, a collective myth born from the particular madness of particular war, from the stress of young men in a place they did not understand, seeing enemies in shadows and meaning in silence. Both possibilities are extraordinary. One requires a creature unknown to science. The other requires hundreds of men, veterans, survivors, people who would look death in the face and reported it accurately enough to be trusted with military intelligence, to have independently invented the same impossible thing. The jungle of Vietnam is one of the most biodiverse and least explored ecosystems on Earth. As of 2024, there are still regions of the Central Highlands that have never been surveyed by scientists. The Nguoi Rung, the people of the forest, have never been captured, never been photographed, and they have never been proven not to exist. The men who came home from Vietnam brought many things with them. The weight of what they had seen, what they had done, what they had lost. Some of them also brought a story, quiet, persistent, peculiar, about a creature in the jungle that stood on 2 legs, looked him in the eye, and walked away. They are still telling that story. And somewhere in the mountains of Quang Nam province, in the green dark beneath the canopy, the jungle keeps its silence. If this story made you question what else might be hiding in the world's forgotten places, you're not alone. Thousands of veterans carried accounts like these home with them, and for decades, history barely listened. If you want to go deeper, the Battle of Dong Den, the footprint cast of Professor Tran Hong Viet, the North Vietnamese military expedition of 1974. Drop the word Rungape in the comments below and we'll pin a full research breakdown for you. And before you go, one question. Do you believe these soldiers saw something real? Or does the answer lie somewhere in the psychology of war? Tell us in the comments. These conversations matter. If this video kept you watching until this moment, the algorithm needs to know this content is worth your time. Hit that like button. It takes 1 second, and it means the world. And subscribe, because what we're covering next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about what soldiers have encountered throughout history. The jungle has more stories. We'll be back with another one soon.